train not been late, I never would have had time to read the newspaper article about the book. But there it was, a piece about an astounding memoir of a teenage boy dying of AIDS, the victim of horrific child abuse. His spirit and optimism still intact after a brief lifetime living in a world of nothing but shattered glass. I read the book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, by Tony Godby Johnson in one sitting. And within weeks, I was Tony's phone pal, baseball buddy, advocate, consoler and counselor, and adopted brother. It was all heartbreaking, until I noticed one day that when Tony's mother or doctor came on the phone with him, none of their voices ever overlapped. One spoke, then the other, then the first again. Think about it. That's not the way real-life conversations work. And then there was the Saturday night when, as the background of the frail voice of the boy supposedly down to his last T-cell, I heard laughter and car noises echoing up from the street. "Oh, I have the window open," said a person so sick he had been permitted no visitors in a year. That's when I hired the private detective. Our third story in the countdown, I was not the only one whose heart led him into the Tony Godby Johnson scam. Mr. Rogers, Oprah Winfrey, the author Armistead Maupin. All of us figured it out eventually, but only Mr. Maupin figured out what to do with the fact that there was no Tony Godby Johnson, just a woman named Vicky Fraginals, playing the roles of Tony and Tony's mom and the live-in doctor. Maupin made it into a novel, The Night Listener, and now it's a movie that opens today. He'll join me in a minute. First, a clip.
Hi, it's Pete Logan.
I was really impressed by your book.
I swear it's really you.
Why wouldn't it be me?
I'm sorry to cut this short, but he's a very sick boy. He doesn't have very long.
This must be very hard for... I'm worried about Pete.
I think it's possible they're being a little melodramatic here. It seems so over the top.
Why would someone do that?
I don't know. Money, maybe? To sell a book?
There's ways to prove this.
Joining me now, as promised, Armistead Maupin. Thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Thanks, Keith. Nice to meet you, even this way.
Yeah. Is there any way to tell anybody who didn't read the Rock and a Hard Place book or didn't talk to what you and I believed was Tony Johnson, just how compelling his story was?
Well, I think I was especially vulnerable because this kid was supposedly dying of AIDS, was going to be dead in 6 months, and my partner at the time was and is HIV positive, and my best friend was on the verge of dying. So I was especially compelled by the notion of this teenager who was straight identified, a straight kid who was very gay friendly. I'm a gay man, and it was amazing to see that he had no homophobia, and there was something really charming about him on the telephone. He was a real spirit, as you know, someone you could talk to for hours, and he was never depressing and always self-effacing and funny. And the story, I think, had a way of growing because of our own imaginations. If you recall, his book itself is not very graphic, but we would hear these stories from other people, and I think your own imagination makes it seem, builds it in that way.
I mentioned how it came to me that there was something wrong here. When did you realize this was not what it seemed to be?
You know, my partner came in about 6 months into the conversation and talked to Vicky for the first time. He'd been talking to Tony. And he spent about 5 minutes with her on the phone and then turned to me and said, "Don't you think there's a very strange similarity in their voices?" And as a matter of fact, I had noticed that because on one occasion I'd said, "Oh, hi, Tony," and she'd say, No, it's Vicky. Don't say that to Tony. He hates being mistaken for his mom." Well, that worked on me because I remember what it was like to be 14, and I didn't much like that either. Then as soon as he said it, I could see it very clearly, but had no way of proving it. And fortunately, the storyteller in me took over, and I was just fascinated by this sort of real-life mystery that I'd found myself in the middle of.
Yeah, and me too. And just to clear it up, the mother-son relationship was supposed to be adoptive, so there was no inherited sound-alike quality there. But when you figured this out, or began to figure it out, did you try to tell others about this? I mean, there was an Associated Press reporter who swore she had met Tony, and I remember calling some of her associates at the AP and telling them, listen, I actually hired a private detective to check this out. There's no little boy living there. It's a woman. She has a history of insurance fraud, and she's got 2 fat daughters. And the Associated Press people said, no, our reporter is never wrong. Did you reach out to other people who were involved in this?
Yeah, well, I spoke to the editor at Crown Books, to David Groff, and said, please don't let this go any further because I don't want to be doubting a child who's reporting child abuse, but do you know anybody who's actually ever met Anthony Godby Johnson? And he got up and closed the door and sat back down and said, you're going through the same thing I went through 6 months ago, but I can assure you he exists, and he's a little bit like God. You just kind of have to believe in him. That reporter, by the way, for the Associated Press wrote me after The Night Listener came out. She read a review of it, and I think she assumed the whole thing had been put to bed, and she sort of said, you took the courageous way. I didn't quite know what to do, and I ended up leaving my job. I quit journalism because of it. And I don't know what happened with her, or exactly how she was persuaded to believe this, but apparently she was.
In fact, I think I do. The story I heard was that more than likely one of the daughters of this woman, Vicky Fraginals, was dressed up, swaddled basically in clothing, and sort of just presented as Tony that you could see just from the doorway. So she may have actually thought that she met a little boy, and it was just a large little girl who didn't speak, which explained everything.
Yeah, I think she had suspicions. As did we all. And of course there was that photograph that we all got sent very early on, so you had this visual to go with that audio on the phone.
In the cathartic process of turning this into a novel, why did it become something as dark as the novel was and even darker as the movie appears to be? There's a real kind of threatening quality to this.
Yeah, I think I just took it and ran with it. I mean, I've never said it's anything other than a novel. It is fiction. What Gabriel Noon does in the novel and in the film didn't happen to me in real life. But the idea, the whole thing, I was completely creeped out by it. I don't know about you, but once I figured out what was going on, my mind went everywhere. I couldn't imagine, first of all, why somebody would do this until I started thinking about it as a pathology, and that made more sense because it was quite clear that it was a 24-hour operation. She had to inhabit that child at all times, but given the number of people that were talking to him and had close relationships with him on a regular basis.
My thought, by the way, was, hey, at least there's one less kid dying of AIDS. We can take that away from it. And I just got out at that point. The one positive in there. Now, Tony never asked for money, and Vicky, the mother, never asked for money. But they used to talk, and this doctor character used to talk about black market drugs to fight his AIDS or his bronchial problems or his T-cell count or any of the other side things. And I volunteered to pay the cost of some of these, a couple of $1,000, whatever it was. Did you ever get sucked into that too, or did anybody else you know?
I never did. I waited for that to happen, but I never did. But I know I've heard of other people who did, and it was a lot more than a few $1,000 who gave her money to take care of the kid supposedly in a facility somewhere. But it didn't happen with me. I think she had a brilliant way of adjusting to whoever she was talking to, knowing exactly how to push one thing or the other. She actually, by the way, Keith, she named the character in the book. I told Tony, Tony Vicky, that I was going to write this book because I was hung up on writing it. I'd already accepted an advance from both my British and American publishers, and I was afraid that once the book came out, and there really was a kid on the other end, that I would really be in a real bad situation. So I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Well, I'm a big boy. I know what fiction is. There's a lie and the truth contained in that one phrase."
Boy,
and so she named him. She said, "I'd like to name him Pete."
Wow. Well, lastly, I've always been reluctant to talk about this. I just thought, okay, I found out the truth. I don't need to disabuse others of what they believe. But I finally decided when I have to be a fool, I'd rather be our kind of fool than Vicky's kind of fool, correct?
Absolutely. I have no regrets whatsoever. I was acting out of human kindness, and I don't think anybody has a reason to be ashamed for doing that.
Armistead Maupin, the author of The Night Listener, now, as they say, a major motion picture. Pleasure to talk with you, sir.
Nice to talk to you, Keith.